Hello, Warriors of Light, Merry Starlight, and Happy Heaven's 10. It's been a while, but I hope you guys are ready for another round of stories about La Noscea. After all that Ocean Lim Lane, Percos Thalios talk, I knew that my next direction would be headed here, gradually towards Mount Ogomoro and the floating city of Nym, which wasn't always floating, by the way. The stories of Upper La Noscea will be broken up into 3 videos, and this is part 1 covering how the region changed from 1.0, the tragic story of the Wondrous Palace and the War of the Magi, and a story about how the Mamool Ja lore was already in Eorzea 10 years before Dawntrail. You may think that Nym and the Wondrous Palace are the most OG lore of Upper La Noscea, but I have reserved the GOAT lore of all time for part 2 instead. So do subscribe and hit that bell to know when that lands. Did you ever look at the maps of both Upper and Outer La Noscea and sometimes got confused at which map you were looking at because they look kind of similar? Well, you're not wrong because they are technically the very same map graphic, only split up into 2. This may have origins in how everything in this region was part of the same map in 1.0. So Bronze Lake, Oakwood, Zelma's Run, Ugamaro Mines were all part of Upper La Noscea in 1.0. 2 lakes also defined this area, Bronze Lake and Iron Lake. But it seems like there wasn't really much of anything to see or do at these lakes in 1.0. I don't know if it was possible to fish at either lakes here in 1.0, but if any 1.0 fishers are watching this, please let us know in the comments. In any case, as this region as a whole is the closest in Veilbrand to Mount Ogomoro, kobolds have long since mined deep beneath these lands, weakening its structure. When the 1.0 Calamity struck, fissures formed in the lands containing both lakes, and they were drained, but to different extents. The half-drained Bronze Lake revealed natural hot springs and the beautiful Nymian ruins as we now see, while the full draining of Iron Lake allowed kobolds to mine even deeper into Mount Ogomoro. Today, Bronze Lake remains in the 2.0 map of Upper La Noscea, but the region where Iron Lake used to be and the Ugamaro Kobold Mines are separated as Outer La Noscea. In this video, we will zoom in on the stories of Bronze Lake. I've got to say, back when I was playing ARR, Camp Bronze Lake was one of my favorite places to just AFK at. Perhaps due to my good experiences with hot springs in Japan, just placing my Warrior of Light in a hot spring in a game had similar restorative effects and feelings too. What's more, the springs also offer a beautiful sight to behold, the Nymian ruins of the Wondrous Palace. The Wondrous Palace is a massive stone temple built by the Nymians dedicated to their patron god Oshun the Wanderer. Nym is one of the 12 city-states that once flourished during the Fifth Astral Era. Existing records also suggest that the worship of the 12 started in this era, with each city-state taking on a patron god each. So yes, this means that there are actually a total of 12 city-states in the Fifth Astral Era, waiting to be discovered. And I wonder exactly how many will the Occult Crescent reveal. In any case, Nym worshipped Oshun, and this is why you see Oshun's symbol of the walking stick glowing on the ruins of the Wondrous Palace. The symbol only glows in the dark or during storms. You can also find the walking stick symbol in 4 more areas within the Wondrous Palace. However, the fate of the Wondrous Palace is a sad one for Nym. The Fifth Astral Era is scarred with the War of the Magi. In this war, the tactical Nymian Royal Marines had successfully defended waves of Voidsent assaults from the neighboring city of Mhach. Mhach, however, grew wary of the protracted campaign against the small state of Nym, and eventually hatched a plan that would bring Nymian civilization to its knees. A group of Nymian sailors/traders were battered by a supposed storm at sea, ending up on a supposed deserted island, and were supposedly rescued by a group of Lullafels whom not only nursed them back to health, but mended their vessel. All not before bestowing upon them a supposed parting gift of friendship, a beautiful amphora, which is a traditional jar with 2 handles. That was in fact the vessel containing the Voidsent Bitoso. As a symbol of friendship, this amphora was proudly put on display in the Nymian royal halls for all to see. None knew about the green death that Bitoso was about to unleash upon the city. The green plague melted their noses and ears, shriveled their limbs, and turned their flesh a shade of green into what the Nymians would come to call as tonberries. As if the physical transformation wasn't cruel enough, the minds of those who transformed remained clear as Nymians, only to soon witness what would be done to them by their own kind. What the Nymians didn't know, however, was that Bitoso was hidden by a cloak of invisibility that specifically circumvented Nymian magics. And Bitoso's vessel, the amphora, it remained unsuspected and untouched in the royal halls as the plague took over the city. The Wanderer's Palace was eventually used as a quarantine facility as the Nymians struggled to find the cause that was chiseling away at the very heart of their civilization. But the plague continued to spread with no probable cause or cure in sight. Amidst the unthinkable transformation it caused and the inability of their healing arts to treat the infected, hysteria mounted within the city-state, and the remaining mages of Nym, in desperation, used magics to swell the waters surrounding the Wanderer's Palace. This was followed by 3 keystones positioned around Bronze Lake to seal the plague in and put the infected to a slumber for as long as the magics held. The keystone is so named because it refers to the central stone at the summit of an arch, and the keystone is the stone that locks all the stones together. Besides the draining of Bronze Lake, the Calamity had also removed the seal that was held together by these keystones. I really do wonder if this is one of the arcs that held the central keystone. However, by this point, Mhach had already succeeded, succumbing to the mass hysteria and faced against a Voidsent that they did not even know how to find. There was little chance that Nym could overcome the disaster that would eventually wipe out their civilization. It's a sad ending for Nym in the Fifth Astral Era, but do head over to the Scholar Quest for a much happier conclusion to the story. Also, after learning about how the mages of Nym swelled the waters to seal the Wanderer's Palace, it sounds to me that Nym may have had a hand in creating the Bronze Lake that we first saw in 1.0. Also, the BGM that plays in the Wanderer's Palace normal is called A Tonberry's Tears. Hopefully this story gives you much more meaning the next time this dungeon loads in the duty roulette and this BGM plays. A slightly fun fact about the A Rank Hunt Marberry here. Marberry actually first appeared in Scholar Gear, which seems to make sense considering Nym is where the healing arts of the scholars originated. However, the Hunt lore actually says that Marberry is simply a Tonberry who found the hat of a black mage named Maruta Toruta, who had wandered into his demise in the Wanderer's Palace. This explains the name of Marberry being Mar plus Berry. Marberry was subsequently updated to wear the black mage hat and gear, with players swiftly joking during the change that Marberry had switched to black mage in order to learn swift cast. Besides the occasional Marberry roaming on the outskirts of Camp Bronze Lake, another race you'll find loitering around here, and with links to the Wanderer's Palace, is the Mamool Jas. Initially, I thought they were the lizard races from FF12, but actually they are an original lizard race from FF11. What really struck me when I returned to this map after entering Tural in Dawntrail was that the Mamool Jas were already in the game since ARR 10 years ago. And I bet the devs have just been stewing on how their lore would develop in 14. The very first lore surrounding the Mamool Jas can be found in an Eastern La Noscea fate, which states that the 1.0 Calamity had devastated much of Eorzea's manpower, and many Mamool Jas crossed the seas from Tural to Vilbrand, and as mercenaries took up various jobs from slaying monsters to tiling roofs. However, as Eorzea recovered and adventurers returned to the land, the Mamool Jas found themselves increasingly out of work, and many turned to banditry. I don't know, instead of going home? This explains why we see many of them loitering around Camp Bronze Lake, almost looking for a fight. The second most famous of which being Scarface Mamool Ja, who has been banned from the hot spring for his lecherous looks on top of certain suggestive actions which he calls the Mamool Ja's bathing dance. The most famous Mamool Ja we see is Mamool Ja, the boss of the Wondrous Palace Hard. I think it would also surprise many that the lore of Tural surrounding the throne of the Artok was already hinted at as early as around Stormblood, when Encyclopedia Eorzea Volume 2 was released. The two-headed Mamool Ja had crossed the seas to win glory and strengthen his claim to the Artok throne. Unfortunately, employment was hard to find for any Mamool Jas in Eorzea by then, and he resorted to a takeover of the Wondrous Palace for him and his Silver Scales crew. That didn't go quite as planned. And that concludes part 1 of 3 about the stories of Upper La Noscea. I hope you enjoyed my rendition of the tale of the Fall of Nym and the earliest lore mentions of Mamool Jas in ARR. Contrary to Lower La Noscea, where we seem to have lost many things through the Calamity, it seems that at least over here in Upper La Noscea, we have gained a lot from the draining of Bronze Lake. Yes, in fact, I have not even touched on the skeleton in the closet, and also the goat lore of Bronze Lake. I may have dropped a too obvious hint about it already, and you guys can make a guess in the comments. Do subscribe, hit that bell to know when that will land, and share my videos with Warriors of Light whom you think will enjoy them. The next time I AFK here, it would be with the knowledge of how this area was flooded and sealed with keystones, and then unsealed by the Calamity, and competed for not just by the kobolds, but the Mamool Jas too. With the ability to fly now, one can also take a jet ski trip around the actual surface of Bronze Lake itself, coming right up close to the ruins of the Wondrous Palace. What a place where I'm sure all its history can be felt within the aether of its atmosphere. As usual, if I left anything out or got anything wrong, or if the video simply reminded you of any memories, feel free to leave them in the comments. I do read and am touched by all the comments. 1.0 fishers, please let us know if you could fish in Bronze Lake or Iron Lake way back then. Are there any other Mamool Ja NPCs that were already in ARR? And may you ever walk in the beauty of Hydaelyn.